There are a lot of political ideologies out there that you may have never even heard of. Minarchy, geniocracy, technocracy, things can get pretty obscure. But there is one political system in particular that really stands out: Libertarian Socialism. It has all the best things of libertarianism: free agency, not having the government tell you what to do with your life, no one to tell you how to live, no one to force their subjective ideas onto you, free spirits, free love, and it all comes with the best parts of socialism too, without the pesky government taking full totalitarian control of everything. So now the means of production can be shared communally, no one has to worry because each person in this society is given to according to his needs, and each person is only expected to give according to his own ability. Wow, what a paradise. And despite the lack of government intervention, you still get all these great perks and benefits of progressive wealth redistribution, all coming from you, of course. You there, you have too much. Your farm has been deemed too big, your house has an empty room, you're not using that boat so often. The voluntary forfeiture of your private property is required now for the good of the collective. Yep, as the old saying goes, if it sounds too good to be true, there's a good chance it's nonsense. In this video, we will be exploring why libertarian socialism is a political idea that cannot actually exist due to the premise being inherently self-contradictory. It promises to give you the best of both worlds, but in truth, it is a classic case of trying to have your cake and eat it too. First off, let's look at the definitions of libertarianism and socialism from Lexico-Oxford Dictionary. Libertarianism, a political philosophy that advocates only minimal state intervention in the free market and the private lives of citizens. And socialism, a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. Already, just with the definitions, we're starting to see the problem. It's not possible to decide who owns what without some kind of structure of power. So communal regulation effectively just means state regulation, which contradicts the basic philosophy of libertarianism that the state should not be intervening in the free market. Socialism is anything but a free market, and is nearly guaranteed to result in a large, powerful state. I even did an entire video earlier on how Marxism creates a pipeline to corrupt governments. A link will be in the description below. This again displays the uniqueness of our problem. Normally, going over definitions in an argument is just a standard good faith act to ensure your stance remains fair and objective. But in this case, we can immediately already see how libertarian socialism is kind of what you'd call a self-debunking theory that can't actually exist in real life. You cannot have both a state with full control over property rights and no state at the same time. It makes no sense. A market cannot be both free and as far from free as possible at the same time. Now, in a sane world, we could probably just end the video right there. The core idea of libertarian socialism results in a direct logical contradiction, case closed, end of discussion. But of course, we don't live in a sane world now, do we? Of course not. In fact, this is where the madness truly begins, as there are multiple spin-offs to LibSoc. Anarcho-syndicalism, libertarian Marxism, anarcho-communism, stateless socialism, the list just goes on and on. All flawed in some way, but the sheer magnitude of it all can make it a difficult mountain of nonsense to unpack. It's almost an ideological version of the Gish Gallop, where these guys keep churning out so much new subjective theory on a treadmill of fail that if you tried to focus on all of them on a case-by-case basis, your refutations would be too large of a case of TLDR and get lost on people in a sea of confusion. Fortunately, there actually is a common critical flaw that all of them share, a basic root cause of the problem. And to understand what that is, we must revisit the political compass. A big part of why this strange dogma seems to be gaining some traction is likely due to a flaw in the most popular version of the political compass, and many compass memes have already noted this flaw. The issue really boils down to what freedom essentially is. The vast majority of freedoms can be boiled down to two categories. For one, your personal rights, or what freedoms you have as an individual, in other words, your right to self-agency, self-defense, and freedoms of what to do with your belongings, or your property rights. An example that combines the both of them would be, say, your right to defend yourself from a robber invading your home. Imagine if you did not have such rights. They could just move into your house, steal everything you own, physically assault you, and you would have no recourse. So while different cultures and societies may agree on different things, there is a pretty good reason why versions of thou shalt not murder and thou shalt not steal tends to be present in just about every stable society and multiple religions. Most political stances can therefore be broken down to where they draw the lines for these rights, based on how much control the state gets over said rights, and for the most part, it ends up looking like this. So this brings up the question, why is it that a stance that does not respect property rights is considered just as libertarian as the stance that respects both personal freedom and property rights? And looking at the authoritarian side, why are the conservatives who only restrict personal freedom as authoritarian as the side restricting everything? This paradox happens due to the test that the compass is based on allowing people to choose things that are contradictory. You can answer strongly agree to questions of anarchy and strongly agree to large state welfare programs, and it's okay with that even though it makes no sense. Fortunately, I am not the first person to realize this, and there is a better political compass that accounts for these errors, achieved by flipping the compass around a bit on its side. Behold, the Advocates for Self-Governance version of the political compass, along with a simple 10-question test that has been taken over 20 million times and well known for high accuracy despite its short length. This makes a lot more sense. Those who value the free market but desire regulation for keeping tradition are considered conservatives. Those who desire a welfare state but respect individual liberty are labeled progressives. Those who took the test while drunk are considered centrists. Those who desire a strong government are authoritarian. And finally, those who respect both of these type of freedoms are the actual libertarians. So where does libertarian socialism fall under? Well, it's only 10 questions long, so let's take a look while basing our answers on the musings of a well-known libertarian socialist / anarcho-syndicalist Noam Chomsky. Now, on the personal issues, I will actually just rate all of them as maximum freedom for the purpose of good faith. So let's move on to the economic issues. Taxpayers should not be responsible for student loan debt as a first question. Well, Chomsky spoke very highly of a free open admissions college in Mexico City, stating that it's how college ought to be, open to all the community, and as we all know, free things are not actually free. Somebody has to pay for it, so that's gonna be a hard no. Next, what? Government should not be responsible for providing healthcare. In a February 2013 interview with Washington Square News, Chomsky criticized Barack Obama for not going more towards a national healthcare system, going as far as to accuse Obama of being a moderate Republican, so that's also going to be a very hard no. Next up, let people control their own retirement, privatize Social Security. In 2005, for Khaleej Times, Chomsky criticized Bush for even considering reforming it, so that's going to be another hard no. Next up, replace government welfare with private charity. Chomsky strongly defends state welfare in Z Magazine in 1995, another no, and cut taxes and government spending by 50% or more. Well, here Chomsky criticizes how our tax dollars are used, but Chomsky has also stated that April 15th, tax day, should be a day of celebration in a democratic society, so again, hard no. I did the test for many of the spin-off political positions of libertarian socialism as well, each time ending up in the progressive area, never significantly diverging by more than a couple squares, really. This is the critical flaw that all forms of libertarian socialism share. As long as you are honest with the test questions and take logical equivalence into account, they never make it into the area of libertarianism. So if the libertarian socialists aren't actually libertarian, then what are they? Well, what we can glean from the previous testing is that these people are really just pretty much confused progressives, who are stuck somewhere between communists and neoliberals, but refuse to actually commit to any cohesive ideology. When no longer allowed to choose contradictory things that make no sense, they ultimately just end up defending the same things that you would expect any normal socialist to defend. The only difference is in how they say it, and their strange belief that labeling themselves as libertarians somehow legitimizes what they are saying. So the only difference between them and the more self-identified authoritarian left communists, or tankies as they're sometimes called, is that they understand that a totalitarian state has a zero chance of ever transitioning into a free, or at least a more democratic state by its ruler's own free will. Generally, tankies will argue that a strong party must be established for the collective to work towards the goal of communism, which they define as a stateless, moneyless, classless society where the means of production are owned by the workers. The libertarian socialists will generally argue that this step should be skipped entirely, and people should just directly work towards said stateless society, viewing anything resembling a Maoist-style CCP as both an unnecessary and detrimental middleman. The irony here, though, is that both tankies and libertarian socialists are actually both half correct. Tankies are absolutely correct in that socialism requires the establishment of a strong communist state party to get off the ground, as expecting people to consistently give up their property rights voluntarily is unrealistic, pie-in-the-sky nonsense. And the libertarian socialist is absolutely correct that said strong government party will never be able to voluntarily dissolve its own institution of power, as expecting a party with absolute power to just give it up for free is equally unrealistic. Now, if only these people would put 2 and 2 two together here and realize that this means the communist utopia will never arrive, we'd all be in a better state. The explanation for their confusion can be further understood by the work of KGB defector Yuri Bezmenov and his explanation of the concept of useful idiots, which is a term used to describe the leftists who genuinely believe that Marxist and socialist ideology is compatible with a free and peaceful society. They do not understand why communal ownership of the means of production inevitably ends up just being state ownership private property every single time, and I suspect that's where a lot of their confusion comes from, a failure to understand that the only way this kind of perpetual wealth redistribution makes sense is with a strong state, or something that at least serves the same function to the degree that the difference is insignificant. Or in Yuri's own words, the useful idiots, the leftists who are idealistically believing in the beauty of Soviet socialist or communist or whatever system. They serve a purpose only at the stage of destabilization of a nation. This is why once the communist totalitarian state is on its way towards being established, they either join the tankies via the revolutionary to tanky pipeline that always appears during said revolution, or they are lined up in the street and gunned down with the very bourgeoisie they thought that they were fighting against. This is effectively the unfortunate truth to what libertarian socialists truly are, along with their ultimate fate. But of course, they don't like this reality, they don't like this fate, and so there are many excuses and theory crafting they have come up with, which brings us to the next section. And probably the most important section of this video, refuting libertarian socialist arguments. I'll start this off with what is by far the most common thing that you will encounter, arguing semantics. This isn't too surprising since the very definitions of libertarianism and socialism being contradictory and all, the only way for them to get around this is to thus try and redefine said definitions in their own image, and then just gaslight until their new definitions are accepted as reality. Haha! It's not the government man coming to forcefully take your private property away, it's a member of the syndicate, utilizing direct action. Such difference, much anarchy, wow. Haha, the word libertarianism was used in 1858 by a libertarian communist French philosopher guy, so even though the meaning of the word has evolved and is completely different to what it is used by the actual Libertarian Party today, we get to call ourselves libertarians now. Haha, it's not violent coercion, it's justified revolutionary self-defense against the bourgeoisie. Haha, it's not taxes, it's a moneyless society with social credit. Haha, it's not a welfare state, it's just a communal gold pile guaranteeing everyone gets free stuff. Thank you for your mandatory donation, by the way. Haha, it's not insert random authoritative measure here, it's the magical theory cell hamster that serves the same function but is totally not the same because he's a magic hamster. The general problem with arguing semantics here is that it almost always ignores the concept of logical equivalency. Things that are effectively the same procedure between political systems cannot, in good faith, be argued to be seen as reasonably different. Replacing the state with some random communally enforced decentralized hodgepodge Franken theory giant hamster system that has exactly the same power that would normally come from an authoritarian state and does exactly the same thing doesn't mean you get to call yourself minimal government. Arguing semantics really just changes nothing. Even if we were to give them what they want and let them redefine libertarianism in their own image, all it would do is change what their sector of the political spectrum is called. It would just mean that we would now have to find a new word for people who support both property and personal rights. It would be a completely moot point. And no, the libertarianism meant something different 100 years ago spiel is not an exception to this. Political positions and meanings naturally do change over the course of history through many decades of time, but not because those definitions are forced, but because the state of geopolitics changes. You probably wouldn't take someone seriously if they called themselves a Democrat while their political positions are all aligned with the Democratic Party of World War II, and they advocated for segregation and other such things, because those positions don't make much sense anymore as the world has changed dramatically since then along with the Democratic Party. No one would consider such a person a Democrat, so why should anyone consider these people libertarian? Next up, but we want voluntary worker co-ops, man, that's all we want. Just about all socialists of all creeds, not just libertarian socialists, generally resort to a Motte and Bailey fallacy at some point in time. For those who don't know, a Motte and Bailey is somewhat the reverse of a straw man argument, where instead of dishonestly misrepresenting their opposition, they instead dishonestly misrepresent themselves, retreating to an easier to defend but wildly inaccurate and watered down version of their own position in an attempt to dodge criticism. The most common ones you will see from libertarian socialists is that, hey, LibSoc is just worker co-ops. You aren't against worker co-ops, are you? Or how about unions? Only greedy monsters would be against a worker's right to unionize. Regardless of whether or not you believe unions and co-ops are good, the argument here is completely invalid because it's an attempt to obfuscate what socialism actually is, which is really just a communal ownership of the means of production, and is thus a far cry from what they are presenting presenting. Corporations already have the right to operate as employee-owned or be a co-op of some form if they so choose. So this voluntary aspect already exists today. Unions and co-ops are not unique to socialism, nor do they require Marxian economics in order for them to function. So the entire point, again, is moot. Them trying to pretend otherwise is just pure misdirection from the truth, which is that socialists don't actually want it to be voluntary. As soon as you're not looking, they'll be right back out on the Bailey, saying that we should all be forced to act this way. Next, the ultimate goal of libertarian socialism is a stateless and classless society, therefore we get to call ourselves libertarian. This is a typical sleight of hand where the socialists will try to include the success of their ideology as part of their ideology's definition. True communism has never been tried because it's not a stateless, classless, monolithic utopia, then it wasn't true communism. Yeah, no, that's BS. Just because people want a nice outcome doesn't mean their proposed process towards reaching said outcome automatically makes sense. Similarly, the process of libertarian socialism involves stripping people of their private property rights, which is an extreme far cry from what the actual Libertarian Party platform believes in. Them claiming to be libertarian, not based on their actual activities or actual beliefs, but because of some desired pie-in-the-sky end goal that they have in mind, is really just a spin on outcome bias, a false form of thinking where the process is judged based on the outcome, or in this case, a desired outcome. Next up, capitalism is fascism. Fascism doesn't mean anything anymore. So many people have abused the term that the top scholars and historians can't even agree on its basic definition. That's what we get for race baiting so hard. But for the most part, most at least agree that it's some form of extreme authoritarianism, which is the opposite of what the free market is. So not only is this just blatant ad hominem with no real point, it's an ad hominem that doesn't even make sense. Next up, socialism is compatible with libertarianism if it's voluntary. This actually would be a valid point if it wasn't for the fact that in today's political climate, it's a complete and total lie. I have watched many breadtubers and read some of the more popular theory. All of these people are advocating for a nationwide political system, no voluntarism. For the extremely few people out there that actually would be willing to go make like the Amish and create a voluntary commune with 100 or so friends out in the woods, sure, those are the very few people that can have their LibSoc lark, but let's be reasonable here. Anyone could subjectively be considered a libertarian under this context. You could have a hypothetical libertarian authoritarianism, where 100 or so people all volunteer to go out in the woods and form a voluntary society where everyone voluntarily acts as the slave of their strongest member. But is this actually a realistic scenario? No. Let's stop kidding ourselves here and come back to planet Earth. Allowing utter nonsense to pass the BS meter just because of the extremely rare 0.00001% exception is not a good defense of anything. But property rights can be used to exploit people. Basically, libertarian socialists will try to argue that trade in a free market is actually coercion, and therefore by being against the free market, it is in fact they who are standing for freedom. First off, this claim is just flat out historically inaccurate, as countries with democracy and free markets have a track record of doing far better for the common man than socialist or communist countries. Second, a simple way of explaining why this is nonsense is to refute one of the more popular and somewhat recent analogies they use to try and prove this, known as the Coconut Island analogy, originally conjured into this world by a certain debate bro. The analogy goes like this.
Imagine suffering a plane crash above the ocean with only you and one other passenger surviving. Both of you get washed up on a deserted island with nothing but sandbanks and palm trees. Once you wake up on the shore and look around, you notice the other survivor's footprints. Looks like he woke up before you. As you explore the island, you find him sitting on a huge pile of coconuts. Turns out, while you were unconscious, he went around and collected every single coconut on the island for himself. Coconuts that you would also need if you don't want to starve. Of course, you could go and try your luck catching some fish along the shore, but according to statistics, 9 out of 10 startup fishermen end up dying of hunger in the end. The coconuts are your only realistic chance at survival. So you ask him, can you give me some coconuts, please? And he says, sure, I can give you some coconuts. If you suck my dick.
The problem with the Coconut Island analogy is that it's actually a far more accurate description of communist dictatorships than a representation of a free market. No, really, think about it. The guy who owns all the coconuts is the only thing representing a state here, so a totalitarian government owning all the means of production, check. Moneyless? Well, the coconuts just represent food here, something countries striving to communism tend to have a problem with. In a free market with money, you are generally able to use it as a trade medium so that you can perform other work rather than being forced to act as the state's slave. slave. So again, this analogy is far more accurate for communist dictatorships. Classless? Well, you don't have any classes here except for the slave and the state, which again is far more representative of communism than anything else. See, the main logical flaw here is that the Coconut Island analogy doesn't actually point out any problems with private property. Rather, it's displaying problems with monopolies. This is known as an ignoratio elenchi fallacy, where the argument and conclusion are disconnected to the point. Free countries with free markets have been proven to be far more effective at mitigating monopolies, with many right-wing libertarians and conservatives even agreeing with each other that anti-competitive business practices that lead to monopoly should be viewed as forms of aggression. Now, compare this to socialist states that legitimately turn the entire government into a monopoly that owns all the coconuts by state force. Saying private property is bad because monopolies are bad is like saying drinking water is bad because too much can kill you via toxic hyperhydration. It's an unrealistic scenario that proves overconsumption is bad more so than its actual intended point. And that really about wraps it up. In conclusion, libertarian socialism truly is an oxymoron. Nearly all of the excuses in its defense tend to rely on some form of judging their ideas based on goals that rely on the success of their ideology rather than any legitimate process. So they label themselves as libertarian based on the misguided pie-on-the-sky ideas that make absolutely no sense whatsoever when put under scrutiny, such as how they are totally really sure this time that communal ownership of the means of production will totally not end up being state ownership this time. Spoiler alert, it's not gonna be that. It's gonna be state ownership every time because collectivism still must be represented and therefore can't actually own anything. Taking two concepts that contradict each other and claiming that they are actually fine together because it will just somehow work out in the end, despite a complete lack of evidence or sound rationale to back that statement up, is simply not honest reasoning. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like, subscribe, and all that good stuff.